Over the past 6 years, I've owned hundreds of watches that I've purchased from AliExpress. I've owned them, I've enjoyed them, I've worn them, and I can say that there are some good watches from AliExpress, there's some great watches from AliExpress, and there is some incredible watches from AliExpress. But as I look back at all the watches that I've owned, experienced, and worn, I can say that there are 13 that stand out to me as my favorites. And because they're my favorites, they would also be my most recommended to you. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And I do say that these are my favorites and therefore my most recommended, and also that does not always mean that it overlaps with the best quality watches. I've had some amazing quality watches that I really like, but they haven't really settled into my collection and haven't become one of my favorites. I can say that there are some amazing bargains, that the watch for the money is incredible, but that again doesn't always overlap with a watch then becoming my favorite. Today I want to share with you 13 watches that I've owned over the years that have just been the ones that stand out to me, the ones that I have connected with the most, and the ones that, as a result of that, I feel like I should recommend to you almost above any other watch that I've ever purchased from AliExpress. And it might be a good time to consider one of these watches because we're about to enter the biggest sale of the year for AliExpress. And because of that, of course, I'm going to leave some affiliate links to all the watches that I'm going to show you today. And I would like you to make sure to stick around to the end because the last watch might be a little bit of a surprise for you. But the first watch that I want to share with you today and recommend to you has to be the Martin SN0144. It is probably one of the best quality watches on today's list, but that's actually not why it's on the list. It's the first one that I want to talk about because of just how good looking it is and how amazing it feels whilst it's on wrist. And although my favorite of the SN0144s is the first one that I purchased, the blue dial 39mm, this one actually comes in a bunch of different variations and different case sizes. 36mm, yes, that 39mm, but also a larger 42mm. And what I can say is that I've now experienced a couple of the variants of this one, that I'm not so much saying that the blue one, the one that I owned, is the best one. I'm saying that all of the SN0144s are incredibly made watches that feel so good and are just lovely to have in the collection. But probably one of my most recommended watches, a watch that I don't think has actually been sold all that much, but I think should be sold more because it is so good, is the Sugess bronze chronograph. It is by far probably one of my most recommended on the list, one that does not get the attention that it really does deserve. And it's partly because of the look of it. Although that this particular design is not specifically original, it is, however, amazing. The quality of it is very, very good, and it has just a wonderful looking chronograph dial, but also that lovely looking chronograph movement in the back. But this one just became one in my collection that I kept reaching for over and over. It's not a particularly small watch, but it's also not a huge watch with a case of 42mm, and I think a lug to lug of around about 50. But what I can say is, after owning lots and lots of watches over the years, that this is one of those AliExpress watches that I had in my collection that I found myself reaching for over and over again because it is something a little bit special. Another one that I have reached for over and over again in my collection is the Baltany Datejust. One of the nicest feeling watches that I've ever actually owned. Not just AliExpress, but of all time. And it might actually be a little bit weird, but this is probably one of the reasons why the watch has remained in the collection and why it is actually on this list today, and it is because of that on-wrist feel. Of course, it is also a very well-made watch, not a particularly original design, and strangely enough, not really a design that I would normally have thought that I would have gravitated towards, but it is certainly something that has turned me onto this design for this particular watch, and also helped me appreciate a different size of watch too, because this one comes in at 36mm, which normally I would sort of reserve for vintage only watches, but this one has taught me that the feel of this particular one really overcomes anything that I had preconceived notions of. And I can actually say that the next watch on this list could almost be any of the watches from this particular brand, Milifortic, because I've had the same sort of feeling from almost every single one that I have had hands on with. But it's the Milifortic Murph style homage that tops the list for me. It's the one that I connected with the most. It's the one that I end up wearing the most out of all of the ones that I've experienced. And I think that this watch, all the watches from this brand, might actually be some of the best watches for the money that you can buy on AliExpress. But of course it goes beyond that, especially on today's list, because that's not the reason why I'm talking about it today. I'm talking about it because I truly feel that this is one of the watches that I can truly most recommend. And it also has a great set of dimensions too that I think most people will like, because the case of it is 39mm. So sorry to interrupt. I know it is sometimes annoying when people jump in the middle of videos and ask you to subscribe, but that's exactly what I'm doing. So please, if you haven't done so already, could you please subscribe to the channel? Okay, let's get back to the video. A watch that I owned relatively early on in my AliExpress journey was a watch from Tandori, the 62 Mass Homage. And I've actually had a few different 62 Mass homages over the years, but it is the Tandori that has stood out to me the most. It just felt right. It looked good. The quality was actually so much better than it probably should have been for the cost of this particular watch. And if you are caught up in that popularity of this design, which I understand because it is a great design, I would actually recommend the Tandori over almost any of the other homages of it that I've experienced. And it is a full-size watch, the Tandori, at 41mm. Another brand that I've experienced a lot from is Addiesdive, and I've been quite impressed by a lot of them. Some of them have stood out to me more than others. Some of them have ended up staying in my collection more than others, but the one that stayed the most, the one that I enjoyed the most, the one that I kept gravitating towards, and the one that I recommend most is actually their bronze Willard. And of course it comes with all the positives of this Willard design. The looks, its comfort on wrist, and albeit at a 43mm case diameter, of course it doesn't sit like that because of this design. But for some reason it's this one that has kept my attention. I've owned quite a few Willard homages, and it is this one that I think stood out to me almost most. Partly because of the design, partly because it was bronze, partly because of how it felt, but I think it just ticked enough boxes. It felt good, it looked good, and it had enough interest factor to it that kept me coming back to it. And of course, on this list has to be my all-time favorite and probably most recommended watch from AliExpress, and that is my Hruodland Turbine Pilot. Yes, it may no longer be the best made watch that I've ever experienced from AliExpress, but it is by far my favorite. It's by far my most worn watch from AliExpress. In fact, it has turned into one of my most worn watches of all time. Some people do get a little bit concerned about the size of this one, however, being 43mm. But what I can say is that I have a 17cm wrist, which is a medium size wrist. And as I've mentioned, I've worn this one a lot. I reach for this one all the time. So obviously I have no issues with the sizing of it. And one watch that I actually ended up having on my wish list for a couple of years before I eventually bought it was from Tactical Frog, their FXD titanium homage. A design which I thought wouldn't quite be for me, a titanium metal, which is not normally something that is for me, something with fixed lugs, which I did not think would be for me, but as soon as I got this one in my collection, I thought, okay, this is something rather special, but it's not perfect. The bezel action is pretty poor, the crown action is not ideal, but put those two things aside, and this watch is actually amazing. It is a 42mm case diameter watch, of course made of titanium, but it is the quality of the dial, the markers, the lume, and the strap. It just becomes such an easy watch to wear, and something that I wish I'd actually purchased when it first came out, and didn't wait so long to purchase it for myself. Now, a watch that I think almost would have come out of my imagination if I designed a watch for myself is a watch from Aquatica, this bronze GMT. It is a mix of a pilot watch, which I love. It is a GMT, which I like. It has interest factor on the dial, but also further visual impact because of that bronze case. And in combination with that red dial, it just pops, and it is really nice. It's also a full-size 42mm, and being that pilot design, it kind of does suit that, and it just ended up being a watch that is special. And I kept saying when I owned this one was that, oh, I could have designed this one. If I had pictured a watch in my head, this is something that could have come out of those thoughts. But one of the best divers that I've experienced in recent years, and something that has a great combination of quality, price, but all those details, design elements, and unique design elements that really stand out to me, was the IX&DAO Dragon Scale Diver. One of the most detailed and thought out designs that I've come across. Then those details and those designs all then complement each other too. I just kept getting lost in those details of this one whilst I was enjoying it. And I enjoyed it further because it did sit down onto my wrist beautifully, having a 39.5mm case diameter. But this brand does make some great watches. I know there's a couple that people are a little bit unhappy with, but what I can say is after owning a few from this particular brand, the quality is there, but for this particular one, the design and the wearability is also there too. And I talked about my love of pilot watches, and my love of pilot watches started with one particular watch, a watch from Escapement time. This Type B Flieger honestly was a watch that I bought just to sort of fill a spot in my collection. I thought that I should really own a pilot watch because I had not owned one before. But as it turned out, it started my journey towards loving pilot watches. And now that I've actually owned many pilot watches since owning this one, all at different price points, I do find myself coming back to this one, this 40mm case Type B, and thinking, what a fantastic watch that was. This journey of pilots that I had could have started and finished with that Escapement time. And when I think about where my journey of AliExpress watches started, it actually started with a watch that I wore so much that it really pushed me to look more at watches that are coming out of China. And it was one of the early popular watches from San Martin, the SN0004. And it's a watch that you can still buy today. It is a little bit different to the one that I owned, but it is definitely something that really turned me on to AliExpress watches and introduced me to San Martin as well. This one in particular had a really great blend of that sort of vintage aspects, the quality of it, the wearability of it. It has a lovely size as well, having a case of 38mm, and I just connected with this one. I remember wearing this one day in and day out. It is a bit of a theme of today's list. It is the idea of today's list is to share with you my favorite and the watches that I've connected with the most. And that leads me to probably one of the most surprising watches that is on this list, and the last watch that is on this list. It is another watch that I own from Hruodland, and it is a Black Bay 58 homage. However, it's not really. However, it sort of is. And you'll see that this one is another bronze case watch. And it's not that I specifically was choosing or wanting to share lots of bronze case watches with you today. It's just ended up being the ones that have stood out to me the most. But this one, you'll notice that, yes, it obviously looks a lot like a Black Bay 58. Even the sizing of 38mm is the sizing of it. However, it is also very unique. That dial is unique to this watch. Those integrated lugs are unique to this watch. The amazing leather strap that it came with is unique to this watch. And it actually turned out to be such a watch that I liked so much that I ended up then purchasing the Tudor itself. And it's strange because I then sold this Hruodland and then started wearing the Tudor. But recently, I've realized that dive watches aren't always my go-to watches, and I've ended up selling that Tudor, and it has made me think that I now want to go back and re-buy this bronze Hruodland. And that doesn't happen to me very often, but I'm very much seriously re-buying this one because I want this one in my collection. And albeit that it is, of course, not as good as the Tudor, I think I actually will prefer to have it in my collection longer term. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys maybe leaving a comment to let me know if there's any watches that you have really connected with from AliExpress. I'm always looking for more to purchase myself and find those real special watches. And I know you guys have been buying lots too. But after you leave that comment, well, I do have some other videos you could possibly watch next.